Join us as we talk to the fastest sailor in the world.
222.5. Slowing down here slowly.
So good. He absolutely nailed it.
Multiple America's Cup winner.
Great shot from the drone as Glenn Ashby heads across the trampoline, takes the helm for a moment.
And multiple A-class world champion. An all-around catamaran legend, Mr. Glenn Ashby, as he sets his sights on both the cruising lifestyle and separately setting a new world sailing record. Glenn,
Brent,
welcome.
how's it going? Yeah, thanks, mate. Yeah, how are you?
Yeah, good. Well, thank you for taking a little bit of time out to chat to us today. Given this podcast is all about catamarans, I thought we had to speak to arguably the fastest man that's ever lived and breathed catamarans. And you've got a heck of a history with your racing career. And given that you've started sniffing around cruising catamarans, well, I couldn't miss the opportunity. So, but thank you. But listen, for those that aren't as in the sailing world maybe and haven't known your racing history, well, before we actually get to the racing history, which is 2 pages long with achievements, but how did you get into sailing cats initially?
Yeah, look, my sort of sailing started really with my mum and dad, I guess. They moved from Melbourne, where they met, and working in Melbourne, up to Bendigo in central Victoria, and joined the Bendigo Yacht Club up there where they were living. Just sort of it's basically a reservoir. Lake Epilock is the name of the lake. Quite tidal. It just goes out one way over the summer. They use the water for irrigation, and then over winter it fills back up again normally. But Mum actually was a sailor, and she started sailing when she was about 12 years old with her elder brother. He actually started off boat building when he was 14 years old. Built his own boat. No one wanted to go sailing with him, but my mum did. She was the youngest out of the 4 in her family, and so she jumped on and absolutely loved sailing. Built her own mirror, and then in Melbourne sailed it twice after spending her life savings on that, and had it in my grandpa's shed, and it burnt down 2 days after she launched it. That was pretty brutal for mum, and dad had just built a brand new trailer for it when they first got married, so that was sort of pretty much everything. No insurance. That was mum's sort of introduction to getting dad into sailing, but they loved it so much they rebuilt another mirror, I think, and joined the Bendigo Yacht Club. Dad learnt how to sail and then actually got into quick cats and bought an arrow catamaran when I was really young, and mum had a sabre dinghy, and I remember going out on the sabre dinghy and sort of rolling around and had a great time. I was only like 3 or 4 years old, but dad took me out for a sail. I think it might have been on the Arrow at that stage. It might have been the Quick Cat, but I can't really remember. I was so young. But I just remember sitting on the side of the boat and, the breeze coming and the boat accelerating, super smooth, the hull lifting clear of the water, everything going quiet. And I was just like, wow, this is like unbelievable. I remember coming back in and just sort of almost being blown away. And I was like, wow, I really like sailing, but I really like going fast. And I love, flying a hull, and I love catamarans. So from the age of about sort of 6 years old, I guess I was probably drawn to multi-hulls, I guess. And even though I started off sort of sailing smaller dinghies myself, I quite quickly progressed into the catamarans. And I got my first catamaran, which was actually an Arafura Cadet, when I was really quite young. I was 7.
I had an Arafura.
There you go. So we're tarred with the same brush. And they're a little boat. I think they're about 10 foot long, I think. And, they're little timber boats, sort of a mini version of an Arrow catamaran, I guess. So like yourself, we started when we were quite young, but I was actually super small for the boat. And I ended up sort of having to sail it up with a mate, because I'd just basically get blown over if I went out by myself, because I was so small. But basically had that for a bit, got into Northbridge Juniors and flying ants and mirrors, and sailed with my dad and a few mates. By the time I was 13, I had the opportunity to either go into a moth, sabre, or a paper tiger. And at 37 kilos, I was a bit light for most of them at 13. But I ended up buying the paper tiger because it was the cheapest out of the 3 boats that we were looking at, and basically went out and sort of taught myself how to sail on a paper tiger. And the feeling of flying a hull by yourself on a, it felt like you were sailing a 50-foot cat by yourself for me at 13 years of age, only 37 kilos. The chines weren't even pressed really in the water. Being able to fly a hull and control the power and steer the boat and, change gears and do all those things, that's what really sort of hooked me into multi-hull sailing. And really that was the sort of beginning, I guess, of my catamaran career.
And so, I mean, that sounds like a lot of people, a lot of cat sailors dabbling in multiple boats of that size and that age, maybe not quite 13, but, playing around with boats in their teens. At what point did you get into the A classes, which you really established quite, 10 world championships today's?
Something like that.
Got that number right?
Yeah, something like that. I'm not sure. I don't even know myself, to be honest. But there's a few there over the years. But yeah, look, the A class was something, and the C class, to be honest, and the Tornado were all, much bigger boats that when you were young, you were sort of, looking at, as you were growing up, I guess. And sailing the Paper Tiger taught me some really valuable lessons in, how to depower the rig, how to tune the rig. They were quite finicky, the Paper Tiger, with lowers and adjustable, lower forestays and a sail that was very sort of manipulative, if you like. So for me as a kid, I really feel that one of the things that really helped me with my sailing and my sailing career was the ability to be able to sail in a class where I had access to great coaching, but also talking to adults. I was racing against other adults, some of them really old, some of them young, some of them in middle age, some girls, some boys. It was just a complete mix of people that were racing Paper Tigers. So being super sort of inquisitive, I guess, if you like, I would just go and talk to as many people as I could and ask heaps of questions. And the Paper Tiger Association, sort of, I guess, almost put their arm around me, if you like, and were happy to help with all the questions and answers. And I just keep asking people, and everyone was just super forthcoming with information and knowledge. So for me, as a 13-year-old kid, learning how to sail the boats, capsizing and learning how to get the boat back up again and getting rescued a couple of times, you learnt very quickly. And then by the time I was sort of 14, 15, 16, I was starting to get a little bit physically bigger. Still wasn't sort of winning events or anything at that point in time, just sailing sort of old boats. But I'd basically worked, gave them motocross racing away and used all the money that I was sort of spending on that, working before and after school, and actually started putting that into my sailing and focusing just on my sailing. And at the age of 17, managed to sort of save up enough money to buy a new set of Paper Tiger hulls and bought a set of beams and basically built my first ever new boat. With that new boat build with my dad, the performance level just jumped up from sort of, around the top 10 to actually then really, really battling it out for regatta wins. And actually, it was a big step forward in performance. I was super into the technical aspects of the boat and, went to my first sort of, I guess, Inter-Dominion international championships as national champion at the age of 17 and sort of team captain as a junior. So, winning a few of those events on the Paper Tiger really then opened my mind into, okay, what's next? What else is out there? And very fortunately had the opportunity, working with Greg Goodall and Jim Boyer back in the day, with the A class and Taipan catamarans, that I couldn't afford new boats, but I had the ability to jump on the odd boat and sort of have a go. Getting on an A-class catamaran for the first time and sort of jumping out on the trapeze and just accelerating effortlessly on trapeze and pulling the Cunningham on, flattening the sail and having the boat just keep accelerating, and just how smooth and quiet and efficient the A-class was. I think I probably sailed for about 50 or 60 metres and I'm like, that's it. I've got to get myself one of these. I don't know how, but I've got to get myself one of these boats. Quite soon after my sort of 18th birthday, my boss at the time, Greg, said, look, if you can beat me at the local regatta up in New South Wales, I think it was the Polar Bear Regatta, Jim and I would be prepared to put a new boat together to send you across to the Worlds over in Spain. And that was a pretty good incentive for me to try and beat Greg, which was bloody hard to do. He came good with his promise, and Jim and Greg sort of put a boat together for me, and I went over to Holland, put a few masts together over there, drove down to Spain, and had no expectations of doing any good at the Worlds. It was a bit of a new experience, but I'd done quite a bit of training on my own and just wasn't scared of pushing things hard, and ended up winning my first worlds basically just after my 19th birthday against about 89 or 90 competitors and a few world champions and Olympic medalists. So it was a very big shock for me, but probably more of a shock for everyone else, I guess.
Yeah, straight out of the gun. That's pretty good start. But obviously, coaching with Greg locally there gave you a good start.
Certainly did. No, look, I've a big hats off to Greg and Jim and Helen and everyone there. It's my early days. I started sail making when I was 16 years old. With Greg, and I learnt a huge amount from Greg, and had the ability to learn not only how to build sails, but how to tune them and change battens and change luff curves. And I was lucky enough in an era with the sail making side of things that it was just before computers really came in. It was really sort of 3 years after I started, or 2 years after I started sail making, was when the first computer plotters actually started to come on the market. So I was just lucky enough to learn how to build sails off the floor, sort of old school with patterns and floor patterns. So I learnt those very, very valuable skills, which, a lot of older sail makers, have in spades, but a lot of the new sail makers have never really done that before. So I was just lucky enough to learn then. But I was also fortunate enough that computers were just starting to come in, and the design software, and also the computer plotters were just coming in, which made the cutting of the panels and the accuracy, much, much better. So as we went forward, we worked together and made some great sails. And I sort of, wanted to go on to bigger and better things, and had Olympic aspirations and other things. So ended up going and working in Europe for a little bit, and then ultimately, starting up my own sail making business in 2002, Ashby Sails, which is sort of still chipping away at the moment with North Sails, still doing a lot of work for us. So it's a great relationship with North Sails, and obviously with the America's Cup side of things moving forwards. That whole sort of North Sails family has been great on the way through.
I didn't realise you were working with North Sails in a sail making capacity.
Not so much in a sail making capacity for myself, but I guess in a design perspective, working with the designers and engineers, being the end customer, if you like, on some of the America's Cup rigs, you're very, very much involved with the design aspects of the sails. So, and other projects now as well. Working on, working with Giovanni Soldini and the Ferrari team on the big boat over in Europe, designing the rig for that. Also Southern Spars. I guess the culmination of all those early days mucking around with paper tiger rigs and dinghy rigs have sort of culminated in sort of, cutting edge technology and being able to work with some of the best engineers and best designers in the business. So I feel very, very fortunate, and I still just ask as many questions as I always have. So probably annoy a few people from time to time, but it's great for the knowledge bank, that's for sure.
That's quite an arc from playing with paper tiger rigs to foiling America Cup rigs. That's nice. Obviously, short gap in between of knowledge, but what a leap. So I think you must have had a string of A-class worlds under your belt, and I remember going to a Wildcat regatta at Foster, and you were jumping on playing around with tornadoes and getting into the tornado scene with Bundy, and so that took quite a path for a while as well.
It did, yeah. No, the Olympic side of things for me was really the sort of the driving force, of my whole sort of sailing career. Funnily enough, never really had any aspirations whatsoever to do the America's Cup when I was young. It was all about the Olympics for me, and watching the 1984 Los Angeles Olympics as sort of a 6 or 7 year old, for me, I was just like looking at all these athletes, and they were, just running, jumping, sailing, doing all these different sports. And I'm like, wow, and there's sailing in the Olympics. I'd really love to go to that one day. And that was sort of the seed, really. And then from then on, it was just like, well, what do you have to do to get to the Olympics? And I'd sort of early dreams of Olympic sailing, but the reality is it's massively difficult. It's super expensive, very, very time consuming, and there's a lot of difficulties in doing it. You have to be super selfish with your time. It's a real dedication to actually get there. And I still had the dream, and luckily enough, through into the sort of early 2000s, John Forbes and Darren Bundock, were sailing together on the Tornado. They were sort of the gun team. John, was getting very, very busy with his work. He'd been to a couple of Olympics in Sydney, and also, in Athens, and he was getting busier and busier. Life was moving forwards for John, and he basically, with Darren, sort of gave me the opportunity to sort of step in, if you like, for John and do a couple of intermediate regattas with Darren on the Tornado. And Darren and I sort of immediately, hit it off really well, sailing the boat. We all got along super well. In actual fact, Darren and I, just for whatever reason, it just clicked. It almost clicked from day one. And I think we finished second in our first regatta over in Spain, and I think we might have won a couple and sort of podiumed, I think, for the next two or three. We then, also joined with Hobie Cat Europe and actually started sailing the Hobie Tigers and doing different F18 events. We started sailing the Extreme 40s together with Nick Maloney, and we just sort of branched out, and with the sail making, the boat building, which we'd started building ACATs as well, Olympic campaign, plus all these other sort of programs going on. It was busy times, but all that knowledge sort of culminated in, making us better tornado sailors, if you like, and really sort of helped us with our rig development. And we were doing a lot of sailing together, and, our boat handling and our knowledge, also with our coach, Mike Fletcher, who was instrumental in sort of helping develop the rigs, and just talk old school development, like just sometimes step away from trying to make it too complicated, just get the simple things right and the rest will follow. Some super, super great, lessons in not only sailing, but life from Fletch. And that whole culmination, if you like, eventually, got to the point where Darren and I were able to go to, the Beijing Olympics together and, win a silver medal. It would have been nice to get a gold one, obviously. Trained for 4 years to get down to sort of 69, 67 kilos for a light air venue and ended up having a moderate to windy one. So
Yeah.
should have gone to the pub and had some chicken parmas instead, I think. For that 4 years would have gone heap better. But anyway, such is life.
Well, I think you're world champions at the time entering that regatta too, right?
We were. We hadn't been beaten in 18 months, by the Spanish team who ended up winning the gold medal. And hats off to Fernando and Anton for the regatta that they put together there. They sailed brilliantly. They were strong. They certainly weren't the lightest team by any stretch of the imagination. They were probably the heaviest, but they sailed brilliantly. And we were a bit on the light end of the spectrum and had a bit of a broken mast spanner in the medal race, which not too many people know about. Halfway up the first work, our mast rotation spanner broke, and our mast basically rotated round to 90 degrees going upwind. So most people rotating wing mast know that your mast rotated to 90 degrees upwind's not that quick. It wasn't too bad downwind, but anyway, we got a silver medal. And did it change the way I slept for the next couple of years? Not a whole lot. It was disappointing, but it wouldn't have changed the pathway, I think, forwards. And, obviously with the Tornado being, sort of the last event at Beijing, there was no multi-hull in the Olympics for 2012 in London. So that was a real shame because I would have loved to have gone forward to have another go at the Olympics, but there was no multi-hull for London. Obviously reintroduced for 2016, I think, in Rio. But funnily enough, a few months after the Beijing Olympics, there was a deed of gift match going on with the America's Cup with a great big catamaran and a great big trimaran, and not many of those guys had ever really sailed multi-hulls before. So it was a bit of an opening of the door, which we ended up sort of stepping through. So that sort of changed the whole pathway of our career, I guess, or my career.
And a huge door to open, right? I mean, it's not often you get an invitation into the America's Cup world. So, and it was an extraordinary event. A Dogzilla and the whole Alinghi battle that came through that. So you were coaching the Oracle team from memory, is that right?
Yeah, that's right. And I sort of joined the team, really with no sort of knowledge or expectations of how an America's Cup program worked. I'd obviously seen the America's Cup, all the way through, my life, and watched, Australia 2, cross the line in 1983 at 4:00 in the morning as a 5 or 6 year old, and that was watch the subsequent America's Cups, unfold. But in between times, a bit like the Olympics, you don't focus on it. You're focusing on your own thing. But yeah, it was funny. Got a phone call from Russell Coots and from Jimmy Spithill saying, "Hey, could you come over and possibly do some coaching with us on the Extreme 40s, which they were sort of using as their sort of test bed." I'd actually done a lot of sailing on the Extreme 40s with Darren, in the previous years, sort of following the circuit round, which was sort of the initiation of the Extreme Sailing Series, which is probably what Sail GP has sort of turned into nowadays. But in those early days, we were using the extreme 40s. And so, yeah, basically sort of thought, well, yeah, look, I can come over and do some coaching. They were sort of looking at a whole lot of different people from the multi-hull background, to pass on some knowledge, I guess, to those guys, and went over there for did my week and said, yep, no worries, we'll see you blokes later. And 2 or 3 days later, got another phone call saying, look, would you be interested in coming over and sort of spending some more time and sort of joining the team? So I had a 6-week-old baby at the time who's now, about 16 and a half. So that's how long ago it was, driving me around now. But yeah, Lani was just a newborn, and I basically, up stumps and left everything and shut everything down and went over to San Diego. And I remember basically getting, the first day I was there, sort of getting taken out on a big chase boat, sort of 40-foot chase boat out to where the Trimaran was, and you could sort of just see it on the horizon way out there off San Diego. I'm like, oh yeah, it's a pretty decent sized boat, and we just got closer and closer, and I was just like, oh fuck, this thing is huge. What have I got myself into? And we pulled up alongside it, and there was halyards clanging around and like 4 furled sails on the front and sail bags all over the deck, and it was just looked like something out of the ark. And I'm like, oh man, what have I got myself into? I'd come from an Olympic background, everything's super detailed and finely tuned. And I'm like, wow, this is pretty different. This is a different America's Cup campaign than what I was thinking. But you fast forward sort of, a year or two later, and I think the only thing left on the boat that was the same was basically the center hull and the two beams. I think everything else pretty much on the boat had been completely replaced. And to have an opportunity to sail, but also be part of that team as my first America's Cup and learn and talk to some fantastic engineers and designers, the infancy of wing sails, and then to pull the trigger, on the world's biggest wing for a boat ever built, and execute that and get it on and then end up using it, and basically sort of, I guess, be part of, the overall performance development of that boat was absolutely incredible. And to work with Jimmy and Russell and all the guys and girls that were involved with that team, it was unbelievable. And for a huge, big multi-hull to develop and push, the loads on that thing were absolutely out of control. But at the end of the day, the boat hung together miraculously for the 2 races it needed to do. And yeah, BMW Oracle in America, won the America's Cup and took it back off Alinghi. So thus the next chapter and moving forwards from there.
Yeah, I remember seeing that wing. They had it at the Oracle shed in San Francisco, or at least a portion of it, and it was absolutely enormous. I think there's some comparisons to jumbo jet wings and whatnot in size.
Absolutely huge. I remember I used to be able to walk down the inside of the spar with Dirk de Ridder. I only really just had to duck my head towards the end. He had to duck a bit earlier than I did, but I could pretty much walk down the spar with a wing on the side, and we'd do all the cable adjustments and all the tuning of the wing. But I could basically walk from one end to the other of the wing without really having to duck my head inside just the actual spar. So it was an absolute beast of a wing and a beast of a boat. And yeah, let's hope we don't have to go down a deed of gift match at any stage in the near future, because it's a big program and an expensive one. And pretty random, but super amazing experience. And obviously Alinghi as well with the big cat. And but yeah, what it did do, I guess, was showcase multi-hulls. And Russell and Larry were really into the multi-hulls, and I sat and spoke a lot to Russell over the sort of the year or so about catamarans, and we did a lot of sailing, we did a lot of C-class sailing together, and ACATs, we did a lot of training camps in the Extreme 40, and Russell was really into catamarans, funnily enough. And so anyway, after they won, the AC-72 was sort of born. So for me, it was a bit of an unbelievably interesting pathway, going from a version 5 monohull to all of a sudden going to these wing-sailed 72-foot catamarans, which was sort of like a dream for me growing up. You think, crikey, how do you actually ever write the script for this to fall into your lap?
It was just extraordinary pieces of tech. And then, well, of course, we should mention that you didn't get recruited by Oracle, you got recruited by the Kiwis.
Yeah, look, I had some decisions to make, and it wasn't an easy one, but there's a lot of similarities between, the Kiwis and the Aussies. That Anzac spirit runs pretty thick, and being close to home, culturally very similar, massive respect for both Oracle and Team New Zealand. It was like, wow, this is really interesting. And Dean Barker and Kevin Shoebridge and Grant Dalton sort of rang one day when I was actually at my cousin's 40th. I was actually in New Zealand, but I was down in the South Island at my cousin's 40th, and they sort of invited me up to have a chat. One morning, I sort of declined initially at first, and then they're like, "Oh, look, it'd be really good if you could come up and have a chat." And so I jumped on a plane, and they flew me up to have a bit of a meeting. And Daltz and I sort of went, bit head to head, sort of straight away. And I'm like, "Oh, you obviously don't, you don't want me, you don't need me." And I sort of turned around and walked out, and that we sort of had a bit more of a chat, and within about 5 minutes, we worked out that it was going to be a pretty good thing to sort of all come together. And I had to think about it for sort of 2 or 3 days, and chatted to my wife Mal, and we sort of worked out the pros and cons and what we were going to do with our business. There's a whole lot of things at home. We had sort of young baby still, and we're sort of like, wow, what do we do? And to cut a long story short, we joined Team New Zealand sort of about 6 months after the America's Cup in with the D2 gift match, and we moved to New Zealand in October 2010. Sort of funnily enough, pretty much had been there for sort of 14 years thereafter, and we stayed with Team New Zealand right the way through, and they basically became our sort of surrogate family, if you like. And a lot of the guys and girls that are over there still are like family, and we still keep in touch all the time, even though I'm not with the team as far as the America's Cup side of things go anymore. After retiring, still very much keep in touch with the team, and got a few other commercial projects on the go at the moment. So still very much catch up with everyone when we can.
That period of technology development and expanse was huge, right? I mean, once the Kiwis cracked the code with the foiling, it was really a whole new race after that, which we've really never looked back from since. But that must have been a pretty exciting period of time when they started strapping on foils.
Yeah, look, it really was. It was an absolutely unbelievable period, I think, in our sport. I feel very, very fortunate to be part of that. And we obviously saw the infancy of foiling with moths and things. I think Rowan Veal was just sort of coming out with the first sort of Blade Rider moths. Foiling's been around for a long time, but as carbon fibre and as construction got better and better, it sort of actually brought more and more things back into the foiling era. And obviously the A-class catamarans and the C-class catamarans have always sort of pushed technology, but the A-class was sort of curved dagger boards and sort of starting to put small winglets on the rudders and things like that, and the boats were getting faster and faster. And we were like, well, what would happen if we just sort of made those foils bigger? And yes, it's a bit more drag, but if you can actually unstick the hull, I mean, isn't that the holy grail of going faster again, sailing on foils? We actually had the the Walker program, which was a super poorly funded little technical program at the time. I think we did the whole Walker program for about I think the whole thing over about a 9-month period. Budget was like less than $100,000, I think, to do the whole thing, and that was build foils, build the test boat, ski boat, fuel. It was everything. It was super light on budget wise for an America's Cup program. It still sounds like a lot of money, but it was basically probably about 1/100th of what you would do normally. But we basically build this sort of 25-foot mini version, if you like, of what the AC-72 platform was, and we took it down to a little quiet lake, like basically had it all covered up so no one knew what we were doing. Took it down there and tried all these different foils and towed it with a ski boat, and crashed and burned. And I'm sure people have seen some of the videos of that testing. But when we cracked the code, like you said, I remember when the boat first took off, and I was lucky enough to be steering the boat at the time, and we basically popped out and the thing just went and just locked in. We're all just like, whoa. And the boat just, like the catamaran just shot forward against the towboat because it was just so efficient as the hull really left the water. I went forward probably about 30 or 40 degrees on the tow rope, and I was almost looking straight at the towboat, out the side of the test boat. We were all just like pumping the sky. And I remember sitting down that night having a beer with the boys, and you really felt like you'd achieved something super special. It was an incredible feeling, and the information that got back to the designers and the engineers, they all came down and we had a look, and we sort of talked about it all over the next sort of week or so. And very quickly we worked out that if we can do this, we'll be able to foil C-72 Catamaran and get it around the track. And obviously, the cat was out of the bag as soon as people saw us foiling down the harbour. We actually kept it under wraps for as long as we could, but we needed to keep developing. And everyone thought that first photo was photoshopped and it's not real and it's not this and it's not that. And we were all laughing. And, unfortunately, we should have just kept it in the bag another a couple of weeks and maybe Oracle might not have caught us in the end. But hats off to them. They did a fantastic job of keeping on developing. And that was one of the things that, was a big lesson after that loss that we had with Team New Zealand in San Francisco, was that we just didn't have the appetite for development. We were too conservative in our development process. We were a little bit, not wanting to risk too much and so we thought we had enough of an edge and we didn't need to do any more. But that was a really valuable lesson for the team after that loss. And certainly a lot of changes were made after that loss in San Francisco moving forward for Bermuda with the AC.
Well, just before we move on, because this is in history one of the most extraordinary America's Cup campaigns possibly ever. Like, it was certainly one of the most spectacular to watch. I watched every race bit by bit. Yeah, the Kiwis had a huge technology advantage. Then obviously Oracle cracked the code as well, and it was head on, very close racing. And I mean, the rest is history. But there was such a close battle over there that really captivated the world watching that. I mean, it must have been exhilarating being part of.
Well, look, it was an unbelievable series. It was a death of 1,000 paper cuts at the end. When you look back, for us, we knew that Oracle were on a fast package. We knew aerodynamically, particularly upwind. And, we, up until a week before that America's Cup, we were racing, the rules were between 3 and 33 knots. That was the rules. And we'd done all our design development really to sort of target those top end San Fran conditions. And basically, a week before we started racing, they dropped the wind limit to 23 knots average speed. So that's a huge downshift in gears. If you were designing from 3 to 23, I think it was 23, it might have been 24, 25, can't remember. But it was a huge drop. It's been that long ago. We would have designed a very, very different boat. And we wouldn't have been pushing ourselves in New Zealand to sail in 27, 28, 29 knots of true wind speed, risking damaging the boat, risking damaging people if we knew that was going to reduce so much. Anyway, time limits running out, true wind speeds tripping while you're leading. You can go through it 1,000 times, but the reality was that, we didn't win that America's Cup. But I guess the only sort of advantage out of that was that, we went forwards into what was supposedly going to be the AC-62. But as history will tell us, that changed sort of partway through that next campaign into the AC-50, which was the exit of Luna Rossa, and sort of really changed the proceedings as things move forwards. But looking back, it was an amazing campaign, incredible to be involved with the technology and development and the wings and, how you sailed the boats and just all that aspect of it was amazing to be involved with. So that was really sort of, I guess, the foundation, if you like, in many ways for what Sail GP is now, for all the multi-hull development and the design that's sort of come from that has really trickled down and filtered down from those AC-72s and probably previous to that as well.
Absolutely. It was such a close battle, and as history tells us, it was a very near win, but ultimately a loss for the Kiwis. I mean, it must have been gut-wrenching. I know it was a really challenging time for the Kiwis, but coming out of that, picking up your bat and ball and reordering things and going back to win in Bermuda was a massive turnaround. So what happened in that cycle?
Yeah, I mean, it was absolutely, gut-wrenching and the most brutal experience that you could really experience in sport, for Team New Zealand. It was just, so close, and to let it slip away really was, it was, and it's still hard sort of thinking back about, how difficult that was to sort of lose. Like, everyone puts in such a big effort and to come away not winning, it was super, super, super tough and hard. But coming forward into Bermuda, like, the team had a really massive debrief program and process after we got back, and we sort of regrouped, a month or so after getting back from San Fran. And It was pretty brutal in that sense as well, because everyone was super honest and really was putting it all on the table. And it really came out that we didn't have the right risk appetite and the right risk management structure to keep developing right the way through, not just to the regatta, but all the way through the regatta, right the way through to the end. And through that debrief process, the team made some big calls. There was new people involved with the team. We had a whole different sort of way that we were going to develop and move forwards. What happened was that the team sort of got rolling and we were well into sort of design and development with the AC62. The Challenger series, was promised to New Zealand. Russell and Larry were sort of like, yep, no, we're going to have the Challenger series in New Zealand. We're all set up for that. And then all of a sudden they went, hang on, we think that the AC50s are good and we're going to have it in Bermuda. And all of a sudden, all the agreements that were in place with New Zealand all sort of fell away. Sponsors pulled out of Team New Zealand. And basically, the team pretty much went almost, well, it was actually bankrupt. It was actually I think we were about $7 million in the red, trying to keep the doors open. And effectively, the team basically had to shut down. SoftBank Team Japan sort of miraculously appeared on the horizon, sort of funded by Larry and his mates, and pretty much took, probably took more than half, maybe 3/4 of the sort of inner workings of Team New Zealand, if you like, with them. And with no money to sort of keep people together, people have to pay their mortgages and have to pay their bills. And it was absolutely brutal being there and sort of making the decision, I guess, to stay with Team New Zealand, and sort of, I guess, in some ways sort of go down with a sinking ship, if you like. We had to throttle right back and, everyone was basically on, 10% retainers of what they were on previously, just to try and keep the doors open. In the end, not many people sort of know this, but there was only 6 of us left in the boardroom out of a team of 127 or 130.
Wow.
From San Fran. So I was one of the 6. Dan Bernasconi, Nick Holroyd, Russell Green, Kevin and Grant initially. And we had to basically make the decision of whether to shut the team down, shut the doors, or whether to stay open. And, I just remember looking at Dan just saying, surely after what we've been through, we can't shut the doors so far. But you look around, you're only looking at 5 other people and you're like, well, shit, what chance have we got? And so anyway, long story short, we ended up sort of keeping the doors open. Matteo Denora and Patrizio Bertelli actually ended up, unbeknownst to myself, sort of having a few yarns behind the scenes, and there was just enough money to basically keep the light switches turned on in the team. We had some new members of the team, that came and joined us. I remember writing their contracts, up to try and get them involved. Certain Peter Burling and Blair Tuke at the time. We managed to jump on the AC45. We just had enough money to buy an AC45 and actually go and do the first of the AC45 circuit series. And we actually won. I think we won that first event miraculously. Don't know how, because we had no training time. We actually won that event. And apparently if we didn't win that event, the money was gone and we were done. So we didn't know how close to the edge we really were. But we, again, only had, just a very, very small crew. It went from 6 to 10 and then 10 to 15, 15 to 20, had just enough shore crew to keep the boat on the water. Everyone was sort of doing 5 or 6 different roles, and, Ray Davies, Richard Meacham, all sort of, coming in. They could have all gone, but they stayed. And we sort of rebuilt the team to a point where we could do a little bit, but not too much because we didn't have a lot of money. But what we did have was just enough money to develop the first simulator. And we ended up putting our efforts into the simulator with Dan Bernasconi and a few of the design engineers. We didn't have any boats. So all the other teams were 2-boat testing by this stage in Bermuda. Artemis ripping around with 2 boats, Oracle ripping around with 2 boats. We had some recon over there getting these videos sent back, and, we didn't even have a boat. So, but what we did do is we put the development into the simulator, and by the time we actually got that worked out, we're like, wow, if we can keep developing this to a certain point and sail virtually, we can test all our dagger boards, all our wing settings and everything in a virtual world. And we just did that. And I remember sitting with Ray, hours and hours and hours, Pete and Blair on their 49er doing their Olympic campaign at that stage and racing and coming back and all this sort of thing and doing a fantastic job. And I remember sitting with Ray and Richard Meacham, and we just did literally thousands of hours, probably more, on the simulator. Just you get there mid-afternoon and you go home at 10 o'clock at night. You just keep rolling through. And eventually, we used that knowledge to build our first test boat, which was pretty different to everyone else's test boat. I had the Xbox controller controlling the wing. We had a different flight control system, a totally different wing. And we had to be brave and we had to think big and throw the ball out there as far as we could. And it was very risky, but we had the right people, a small group, but we had the right people making the right decisions, backing each other to really take it on. And we knew that if we followed everyone else's path by watching what they were doing, we simply wouldn't win. So we had to really back ourselves and be super innovative with our dagger board design, our flight control system, and our powertrain, putting the bikes on and actually making that work. So everyone thinks, it's just the bikes or it's just the wing or it's just the flight control or it's just the dagger boards. On that boat, on that whole program, it was the people being brave and working together and trusting, but it was also a sum of the parts. It wasn't one thing on that boat. It was probably 100 different things on that AC50 that gave us the edge, over Oracle. To win in Bermuda, Brent, was, suffice to say, one of the sweetest victories I've ever had in my life, mate, to be honest. It was absolutely unbelievable to, I guess, be the only one on board that boat carrying the baggage from San Francisco. Was pretty satisfying to sort of, shake off the skeletons off your back and get the ghosts away. And to do that with, the wider team that was there as well, it was absolutely brilliant. And that's, I guess, led the pathway forward to where Emirates Team New Zealand is now, which I'm certainly very proud of the way things have been going there the last few years, last 12 years, really. It's been great.
Absolutely. The trajectory since has been quite an extraordinary one. So let's talk about that. I mean, the development of the foils has come through, the wings, etc. Catamarans have developed so much, and then they take a big, sharp turn towards monohulls foiling, which are spectacular to watch, I must say, and back to soft sails. And you were right in the thick of it again.
We were, as part of the way things moved forward after we won in Bermuda. There was a little bit of an agreement in place behind the scenes, which I didn't know a whole lot about, but we were sort of staring down the barrel of going into, a monohull program. And, Luna Rossa, without them, we wouldn't have got to Bermuda, to Patrizio and those guys and their support, with personnel and finance. I mean, that was part of the agreement that was made. And you sort of had a bit of an inkling there might have been something behind the scenes, but at the end of the day, winning the America's Cup was what it was all about for us at that particular time. What we did was we realised quite quickly that we had probably, some of, if not the best sort of high performance sailors within Emirates Team New Zealand at that particular time. And we were like, gee whiz, if we go to a non-high performance, non-foiling, 90-foot, displacement monohull, is that really suiting us? Or are we going to have an advantage if we go down that path? And we thought, well, probably not as big as an advantage as if we could go to potentially a high performance foiling monohull. That'd probably really suit us. And I remember sitting around the fire with Ray Davies and Richard Meacham and Pete and Blair and the guys and going, well, gee whiz, if we could pull this off, how do we do it? And Dan and I and Ray and the guys spent a huge amount of time sort of, writing things on napkins and pieces of paper and, having the odd beer, trying to work out how the hell we could bring the America's Cup into sort of a more modern, but almost sort of suit the direction of where sailing was going, if you like. And we sort of were drawing foils and things all over the place. And we did sort of 6 or 7 different designs, if you like, of the AC75. And at one end was sort of the super displacement sort of foil assisted boat. And at the other end was sort of the super high tech, fully foiling boat. And we worked out really quickly with the simulator again that all the ones, except for the high performance one, were all sort of a bit half pregnant. They did some things well, but not things well. They were slow upwind or they were slow downwind or they didn't take off early enough. I remember going over to Italy, to Milan, flying in with Kevin Shoebridge and Dan Bernasconi to try and present this C75 to the Luna Rossa as a challenger of record. I thought the only way we're really going to get this across the line with them was to actually send a copy of the simulator of the AC75, which we'd been using, to Francesco Bruni and Max Serena and actually say, hey guys, don't want to say too much, but have a go at these boats and tell us which one you think you like the best. And I remember Francesco and Max coming back saying, "Ah, shit, it's pretty clear, isn't it?" I'm like, "Yep, it's pretty.
There's no going back.
There's no going back. Like we need your help." And they're obviously they're sailors, so they want to sail cool boats. And I think in the end we flew in expecting to be there for 3 or 4 days. I remember sort of driving through the Prada gates in the black Mercedes and all the security standing around, and I remember looking at Kevin and Dan going, "Man, are we going to get shot here? When we step out of the car, what's going to happen?" But we walked in. It was like a scene out of The Godfather, and we sat down, and basically Patrizio stood up and told everyone get out in Italian. Basically, we didn't know what he'd sort of said. Anyway, everyone's sort of looking at each other, and all his Italian crew and all of his people there all had to get up and leave the room. And he sat down with his translator, with Kevin, Dan, and myself, and basically said, "I agree with what you guys want to do. You just have to sort it out now and make it happen over the next few hours." With that, everyone walked back in again, and we were just, Dan, Kevin and I, looking at each other, just going, "Man, this is really happening." And over the next few hours, we sorted out a few of the details and got back on the same Emirates flight that evening and flew back to Auckland. Having basically just signed off on the AC-75 as the next America's Cup boat. So after that, there was obviously a lot of detailing that went into sort of who was doing what and who was doing the foil arms and how we're going to do it and is it going to work? No one really knew because the simulator doesn't tell you absolutely everything. But really, that was the next step in the America's Cup. And I think as we saw with going into New Zealand, the boats did work. They did foil tack, they did match race, and we look at how high performance now. And a lot of people say, look, they're not suitable for match racing, and you can argue all the different reasons which boats you should have, in the America's Cup for match racing and what you should have in the future. But in the end, we're all just super proud that the concept worked, and we've seen some amazing racing, some amazing boats, and we're absolutely at the cutting edge of sailing technology. So where it goes from here, that's not up to me. So I'm happy to sit back and watch.
Yeah, it was extraordinary to watch from Auckland at the time, and then shifted to Barcelona, right? Barcelona, got that right, not Valencia. Barcelona, and you took a seat in commentary and stepped out of the sailing side for a moment, but took another project in a completely different direction with attempting a land speed record via sail-powered craft. Tell us about that. It's just another wild, a trajectory there.
Another wild Ashby escapade. Look, I mean, for me, after winning in 2021, sort of defending. I'd never been a defender before. So it's defending in Auckland, I guess, quickly just on that. I was done. Like, I was content. I'd sort of lost, if you like, sort of the hunger that I'd sort of had previously with my sailing. I'd burnt the candle at both ends pretty hard for a real long period of time. And about 6 months before the America's Cup in New Zealand, I sort of made a bit of a pact with myself that I'm like, win, lose or draw, this is going to be my last America's Cup, and it's going to be my last America's Cup race, as an athlete, as a yachty on board the boat. And, we crossed the finish line, we won, we defended, and, that was it. In my mind, I didn't tell anyone that was going to be my last race, but I told my wife, Mel, months before this will be my last one. But I did say to her and to a few other people in Team New Zealand that after this America's Cup, I didn't say that I was going to retire, which I knew that I was going to. But I really wanted to do the water speed sailing record to have a go at Paul Larson's record, and I really wanted to have a go at Richard Jenkins' record, which is a land speed sailing record. And I had to pick and choose which one to do. It was difficult. I've always wanted to sort of ultimately see how fast you could go with a wind-powered craft, and so I chose the land speed to ultimately just really see how fast you could go as a human across the surface. And that was an amazing, amazing journey. Massively tough, way harder than I thought it was going to be, way longer than I thought it was going to be, even though it was a pretty quickly executed program, with really good people. It was massively difficult and but super enjoyable at the same time. It was an unbelievable experience. And to do that in the desert, on a salt lake, in the dust, in the mud, in the rain, getting washed out, was an incredible experience. To tick that off and then, be offered to come back, as a commentator for the America's Cup was a real honour as well. And sadly, my good mate Peter Lester passed away just over a week ago. which is extremely sad for everyone. So to Pete and his family, mate, we're thinking of you. And super, super sad to know that he won't be with us moving forwards. But his legacy and what he taught me over the years of being a broadcaster is been absolutely epic. And to spend time with him, over the last sort of 12 months, and particularly in Barcelona last year, was absolutely incredible. So to have that honour of being there with him and with Shirley and Stephen to be part of that was fantastic. And I don't know what the future's going to hold, but maybe some cruising. We'll see how we go, Brent.
Well, I hope so. And I mean, you got to slow down at some point, Glenn, but you probably won't slow down that much even in a cruising mode. So are there any characteristics of a cruising catamaran that are going to be a must-have for you if you go down that path?
Oh, look, it's a great question. I mean, I've been dreaming of, designing a cruising cat for probably 20 or 30 years. And I think for me, the hardest part for me is actually really, putting my cruising cat hat fully on. And I think I have to push the racing side of things away and actually embrace, the cruising side of things. And I think if you've got, your complete cruising boats at one end and your super high performance boat at the other end, I think I'd like to position myself somewhere around the sort of 75% mark, I think. I still want to be comfortable at anchor, and I still want to be able to have my wife and my kids and my mates and their kids on board and not scare the daylights out of anyone. So I don't think I'll be going foiling just straight away on my first cruising cat, but I want something that's going to sail. I want something that's going to perform well. I want something that's going to be safe. And I want something that I can, do some, high speed passages on in comfort, and really look after those that are on board and actually look after the equipment. And I want something that's relatively easy to sail by myself or just with my wife and kids. So I'm thinking something around the sort of 50-foot mark is sort of the dream. I think it's any much bigger than that, it's probably difficult to manhandle a lot of the equipment. Too much smaller than that, and I think your waterline length in a seaway is going to get a bit bouncy, and you'll probably end up horsing a bit too much. I don't know. I think maybe around the 50-foot 52-foot mark's probably, ideal. But again, you've got to have the funds to be able to do it. So I'll probably have to keep working in some description, mate, to keep paying a few of the bills before I'll get there eventually. Dreaming's cheap, that's for sure, and I'll continue to dream.
Well, and I know someone that has got some nice 50-foot, good performing catamarans too. So
you'll have to point me in the right direction there.
Yeah. We can keep an eye out for you.
Thanks,
but no, listen, Glenn, thanks so much for sharing. An extraordinary story with. Well, there's a little bit of history there of modern catamaran racing and development, which is pretty cool to unpack, particularly because I'm a bit of America's Cup and catamaran tragic from the sidelines. But no, thanks for all your time. And do you think you're going to get to that sail speed record on the water at some stage, or is that still burning?
It's still burning away. I'm very, very much hoping that at some point in the next couple of years, I'll actually get to have a crack at Paul's record. I'm partway through a design to have a go at that. Again, it's not a cheap program to take that on, and it's not something you do overnight. Paul's given me his blessing as a good mate to have a go at taking on his record, and I know there's the SP80 guys and there's other teams out there also, trying to knock him off, for that 65.45 knot average speed over 500 metres. But it's definitely something, on my wall. I'd love to show you a drawing, but I'll be giving away too many secrets if I pull that out and show you now. I'm hoping so, mate. One day, it's the land speed and the water speed are the two things that I've really wanted to tick off out in life, and I don't think I'll rest until I get it done.
How close do you think the current racing boats out there and with hydrofoils are hitting the mid 50s in their in those formats? How big of a leap is it from low to mid 50 knots into the mid 60 knots?
Yeah, it's a funny one. A lot of people ask me that same question. And, once you start really pushing into that, I mean, you can push the cavitation limits out. You can do specific foils and you'd be able to push it out to sort of, mid to high 50s possibly, even possibly on a dedicated AC75 might even get close to sort of high 50s over an average speed of, over 500 metres. But every knot that you go faster, once you're into that sort of cavitation threshold with sort of semi-standard foils, if you like, it's basically like, trying to push yourself up a brick wall. And the drag goes up really, really quickly as you're sort of getting towards 60 knots. So you really need to go into sort of, super critical foil sections, very much into super cavitating foil sections to actually really break through that sort of the sound barrier, if you like. It's sort of the water barrier in some ways, where you really need to actually separate the flow off one side of the foil completely to allow the boat to keep accelerating through. And really that's, Paul with Sail Rocket really sort of did a fantastic job of that, and actually got the boat up to enough speed where he could actually get into that super cavitating zone, which is not an easy thing to do because you actually have to start the boat from a standing start, accelerate through, and then get into that super cavitating realm. So it's a lot of gear changes on the way through to get that boat from a standing start to actually get up to high average speed. So really, I think in the future with the America's Cup boats, but also with other boats, super critical and super cavitating foils will be definitely a thing of the future. And I've really enjoyed reading and learning and soaking up as much information as I can on foil sections over the last sort of 5 or 10 years to hopefully, put myself in enough of a knowledge space that I can understand how things work. And then I'm going to need some really, really good people around me in a design front and an engineering front to be able to execute that program and be safe, because it's certainly something I don't want to do if I'm not going to come home and have dinner with the kids at the end of the day and my wife. So I want it to be safe, but at the same time, you don't want to be tied to the dock either. So risk management 101.
No, I think it's past 101. I'm sorry. We have a different rule book here. We've got a few boats on the dock. I think we're following different rules. But listen, we're going to watch that with fascination. I think it'll be really interesting to see what you could do there. And you've done plenty of other things before, so we'll watch with great interest. And anyone that wants to drop a few lazy mil or 10 or 50 mil at a project, I'm not sure what the budgets are, but
it won't be 50 mil. But look, anyone that was obviously interested in possibly being involved in something special, I'm very, very happy to talk to, because it's certainly more money than what I can afford, but it's not a whole lot of money to do something super, super special. So definitely open-minded to for any companies or people that may be interested in being involved. So it's open to chat. They can go through you, Brent. I'll let you be the agent.
Yeah,
on this
I'll
one.
be your agent for that one. And when you think about it, when did Paul Larson do that? It was a few years ago now, right?
Yeah, 2011, a long time ago now. It's been 14 years since anyone's broken that record, and Paul basically took about 14 years to to actually, 13 to 14 years to actually break the previous records. It's extremely difficult. I mean, if it was easy, people would be breaking records all the time, but because they're difficult to do, they don't happen all the time, and that's in a way just what makes it so special. The 24-hour record, the Jules Verne, all these incredible records, they're extremely difficult to break. They sound easy on paper, and you look at all the numbers, you go, this should be easy. Look at the performance of the boat. Simulator says this and VPP says that, but it's just so difficult to get the weather to line up, the sea conditions, the equipment, just everything, the judges, just the whole thing needs to come together, and it's an extremely difficult program. And at the end of it, it looks easy when you watch a 2-minute edited YouTube clip. You go, oh yeah, that looks pretty cool. But no one knows the years and years of dreaming and development that go before that time. It's difficult, but doable. And that's what excites me.
Well, there you go. So any future sponsor, at least you're going to be in there for quite a while if you crack the barrier and the legacy that goes with it. So
100%.
We'll watch and really take some interest in that. So Glenn, again, thank you so much. I know you've got another fascinating project you got to go and catch up with shortly, and we might see one of these foiling Ferraris around the water at some stage, I guess.
We will. That's a super interesting program, and really, really enjoying, again, pushing technology and boundaries in the sport that, haven't been done before. And Ferrari have certainly, got a massive pool of talent behind them in the motoring industry. They're bringing a lot of their tool development and their personnel across to this project, from sports cars and F1 and all sorts of people that have worked in different areas. So it's really opened my mind to what's possible in the future. And as a kid, if someone had said, "Oh, look, you're going to go to Maranello and you're going to be walking around the Ferrari factory, talking about sailing," you would have just gone, "What?" But it's happening, and it's almost a bit of a dream come true, this project, in some ways, because it's marrying my love of, cars and bikes and all that sort of wheel technology, if you like, with my sailing. So it's a super interesting project, and some of the technology that will flow out of this boat will be absolutely mind-blowing, and I'm looking forward to seeing that on the water, hopefully next year.
Yeah, fantastic. Well, that's another one we'll watch with interest. Glenn, thank you, mate. Appreciate your time. Always great to catch up and relive the history and the future. So thank you.
Good on you, Red. Thanks for having us.
All right. See you, mate. The Two Hulls, One Life podcast is brought to you by Multi-Hull Central, your multi-hull specialist for the South Pacific.